Good evening. Thank you for tuning in. On behalf of Books and Books, Politics and Prose, and Schuler Books, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with Ashley Audrain to discuss her new book, The Whispers, published by our friends at Pamela Dorman Books. Join us as we explore the quiet sacrifices of motherhood, the intuitions that we silence, the complexities of our closest friendships, and the danger of envy. This is a novel about the reverberations of life's most difficult decisions. Ashley Audrain previously worked as the publicity director of Penguin Books Canada. Prior to Penguin, she worked in public relations. She lives in Toronto, where she and her partner are raising their 2 young children. This is her second novel. To moderate this evening's conversation, Nita Prose is a New York Times bestselling author and a longtime editor serving many bestselling authors and their books. She lives in Toronto, Canada. Just a quick reminder that throughout this broadcast, you can post questions below in the Ask a Question feature. That'll be at the bottom of your screen. I really encourage your participation. We'll do a Q&A at the end. Please order your copy of The Whispers from your local indie bookstore. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage.
Hi.
Hello, Ashley.
Nita. Hi.
It is so lovely to see you. And the first thing I have to say is happy pub day to you and to the Whispers.
Thank you, Nita. Thank you. Yeah, it's been a fun day. It's been a fun.
I'm sure. And it's going to be more fun now.
Yeah, exactly. No, thank you so much. It's very nice.
So I've been looking forward to this for some time. As you know, I'm one of your early readers, and certainly I must be one of your most passionate fans, and I intend to be so for as long as you wish to write.
Oh, that's so kind. Thank you. Well, I feel the same about you, so this is all very mutual, but thank you so much.
So I thought we'd get started this way. I want to tell you a little bit about how I metabolized your book. I wanted to give you my little elevator pitch / explanation of how it hit me and how the premise hit me. And then after, I'd love to hear how you pitch your book, how you think of it. So can I do that?
Yes, you can. Please do. Thank you. I'll learn a thing or two. So thank you.
So for me, The Whispers is about a set of neighbors, and they live on, a very typical upper class city street. And there's a party, and the hostess ends up going upstairs to scold her son, but she doesn't realize that the window is open and that everyone on that street, everyone at that backyard barbecue hears her yelling at her young son. And everyone then has an opinion about what has just happened. And then a few days later, this young boy, is in a coma, and he has fallen out of that same open window. And we don't know. Did he jump? Was he pushed? Was there an accident of some sort? And to me, this is just the most poignant, earth-shaking novel about 3 M's. It's about motherhood, marriage, and midlife. It's about the fragility of female friendships and that strange push and pull of urban neighbors who coexist so tightly together, and yet sometimes really do exist in their own private solitudes despite that proximity to each other. And I think it's also a book that is so deeply speaks to what it's like to be a woman of a certain age. I'm one of them.
Me too.
We have so many choices, Ashley. We have so many privileges. And yet sometimes there's this feeling of loss, of longing, of a lack of fulfillment that permeates the lives of these women that you depict for us so deeply, so beautifully. It is also a rip-roaring thriller that keeps you turning the pages way past bedtime. You cannot stop thinking about this set of women after that last page is turned. They live with me now. They're part of me. And that is my pitch to you. So tell me.
Oh, Nita. Well, thank you. Well, thank you for that. You've described the book far better than I ever have. So thank you. it's so hard to see your own work and describe your own work, and you've done that so beautifully. So thank you for that. Thanks, because you've hit on everything that I hoped this book would be, and everything that I was just itching to write about with this book. Yeah, I think, with the push, I really, obviously was writing about that, darker territory of motherhood, early motherhood, and the beginnings of a marriage, and that sort of very particular stage in life. And with the whispers, I think I'll always sort of have this obsession with that sort of, modern domestic life, and sort of that the things that women don't talk about or don't want to say, but feel so deeply. But I did want to write about that sort of next stage, of motherhood, which, as you've just said so perfectly, is that, approaching midlife, kind of getting into midlife. Because it's such a fascinating time of life to me, in a woman's life. And as you said, I've recently turned 40. We're both sort of, in that space. So we know what this feels like. But, it's such an interesting time in life to me, because like when I think about sort of the decades, you spend your 20s, rightfully very sort of selfishly, making kinds of decisions about, who you want to be in the world and what intrigues you. And, you have all this choice and option. And then I think many of us spend our 30s, making it's like a do sort of decade. You are making all these choices and building a life and putting all the pieces together, whether that's your partner or what your family structure will look like, or your, commitments or not to careers. You sort of have your socioeconomic status. You live in the city, you do, like all of these choices are made. And then when you approach this midlife point, for the first time, you're sort of just living with those choices, and seeing how they feel. And all of that doing and building is done. And what you're left with is your life. Like this is life. You've got one chance at it, and here you are. And I just think, there's a real, I think women at this stage can have a real have to have a real reckoning with who they are. And they sort of ask themselves, like, how did I get here? How did I get here? Who am I? How does this feel? And if that point in life doesn't feel like you want it to, well, what do you do? Like, what do you do if you've got huge financial responsibilities and a marriage that feels very hard to change, and, kids you're responsible for, and if you've left, a job or whatever your life looks like at that point, it's really hard. I think, it's so fascinating to me that some women decide to make major changes, despite the consequences, and that some women are, choose to live with that sacrifice, live with what they have, despite what they have to give up. And that was sort of where my mind was kind of with this book.
Well, I think it's so interesting that we often associate the very notion of a midlife crisis, not with women, but with men. And here in your book, I mean, you explore the other side of it, which is, yes, that it might affect women, but perhaps in a very different way than we think.
Yes. And I've thought a lot about this idea of like the midlife crisis. And you're right. We sort of have this very sort of, stereotypical male view of what that is. And I think for women, it is very different. And I also think, and there's been some really brilliant examinations of this, like the book and the TV show, which I was just obsessed with. Fleischman is in Trouble does such a good job of kind of nailing this. And there's a writer at the New York Times, Jessica Gross, who wrote just a really phenomenal deep dive into this idea of midlife for millennials, which I highly recommend. It was an article she did in March. But really, I think like generationally, we're having a very different experience of midlife, than the generations before us did. And that's for a variety of reasons. We have, I think, financially, like we are not as well off as our parents were, certainly not in the generations before us. And there's not a lot of financial freedom. There's not, we are in such a different place, which really limits a lot of choice. That's just, one example. Many of us are having kids much later in life than the generations before us did. Like I have many friends who are, early 40s and they're just having their first baby, or they're still having, babies, which just didn't happen before. And of course, we've sort of lived through this series of wider societal crisis, one after another, for almost our whole adult lives. So it's just it's interesting to me that how life feels right now and how different that feels in generations before us. And I think for women, it's more of like a deeper emotional confrontation with like, why doesn't my life feel the way it's supposed to feel at midlife?
Yes.
Like, why, you mentioned longing, which I think is a big theme in this book. And I think that's it. I think a lot of women at this stage and age feel this longing for something, and it can be very hard to kind of put your finger on exactly what that is.
Yes.
Especially if you mentioned sort of these privileges, you look around and you have this life of privilege, and you have, like a partner who's, doing a good job kind of, in his role, and you've got a, job that, should sort of be satisfying, and you've got
And the
kids
great
that are
house on the
thriving.
nice street. And
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to kind of think, okay, why don't I feel like I'm grateful for these things, but why don't I feel it? Why don't I actually feel that? Mm-hmm.
Yes. One of the things I so admire about the way you write is your expert wielding of third person point of view. These women, we get to know them so well. You move right into the depths of their being. You make us feel like we're seeing from behind their eyes. We're experiencing everything, including their most private and intimate thoughts. So I just want to run through some of the characters here so that everybody knows who we get to meet in this incredible novel. We have the people-pleasing Blair. She's a stay-at-home mom. She works a little bit, but mostly stay-at-home mom. And she's terrifically jealous of her very best friend. She's my very best friend, but I'm really, really jealous of her, but nobody knows that. Whitney. And then we have Whitney, who is gorgeous and professional and seems to have it all, except that even before her son's tragic accident, she doesn't have it all. And when she sits by that bedside and we step into her being and we start to hear her thoughts, we realize that her bond with her son was not what she wanted it to be. It was strained and it was difficult. And she now has such deep regrets about the way a motherhood challenged her and about her ability to be a mother. And then we have Rebecca, who is a high-powered intensive care doctor, and she's struggling to carry a child to term. She desperately wants to have a child. Meanwhile, she's also caring for everybody else at this hospital, and that deep desire for something for herself, and while she's caring for everybody else, is such a contradiction and a counterpoint that you explore there. And then finally, we have a very different kind of woman, Mara, who's this older Portuguese woman, and she lives in this neighborhood. She is the last of her kind. She's a dying breed. She is older. She's a woman in mourning the loss of her son. And moreover, she's mourning the loss of a community where she once felt a sense of belonging. But where everybody else has moved on, and she's the last holdout. And there's all these young gentrified people moving in. And these women, Ashley, become intimately familiar to us. They're so utterly, painfully, and so beautifully recognizable to any middle-aged woman.
Thank you.
So I want to ask you, who was the easiest to write and who was the hardest to write? And who do you most identify with?
Oh, what a good question. Well, I can tell you, in terms of, let's just sort of answer those questions backwards, the person, I don't really identify most with one person as a whole, but I identify truly with each of them, in their own way. Especially sort of those, Whitney, Blair, and Rebecca, sort of the three women in midlife. I think there's probably a little piece of me in each of them, a little seed of that in each of them. As I hope there is for readers, in a way, when they're as they're kind of getting to know each character. I think it's funny. There were characters that were easier and harder to write at different points in the process of revising and editing the book. Because I think I'm recalling conversations with my editors kind of coming back to me and saying, okay, now we really need to dig deeper, into Whitney's why. And now we really need to really understand, what Blair is longing for, how she's trying to figure this out. I think I would probably say the character of Rebecca because she's sort of like Whitney and Blair are sort of these contrasts to each other. You know, they're sort of these foil, they each are sort of a foil to one another. They're, as you described, very different, but yet they have a very close relationship, sort of built on the fact that they're mothers. And so they sort of play off of each other, and we sort of learn, like, I really loved the idea of, as a reader, learning how a character thinks she is perceived, and then how a character is perceived. And that was sort of this play between Whitney and Blair, because I think you can actually learn a lot about a person and learn a lot about a character to dig into that. You know, how do they think they're presenting themselves at this backyard barbecue, and what does everyone actually see? And there's something almost so cringy about that thought, because we know that's been us too, right? We think we are, you know, putting a certain persona out into the world, but we don't actually know how we are being received. And there's a real vulnerability there that sort of I wanted to play with. So those two characters sort of came along together, like their development sort of came together because they are such foils. And the character of Rebecca, you know, she is sort of this in the triangle of them. She is sort of, you know, that third, because she's just a bit of an outsider to them. You know, they all have the same proximity to each other, but she is sort of this, you know, a little bit removed because she is not a mother herself, you know, and yet she's, as you said, caring for everybody every day. She is caring for other mothers' children, you know, helping to literally save their lives, you know, in the ER of a children's hospital every day. And then, of course, we see her sort of, you know, receive one of their children as well to help him. So she sort of came sort of probably most fully formed to me. She also is this character who she is so consumed with carrying a child to full term. She's so consumed with having her own baby. She, struggles with infertility. She can get pregnant relatively easy, but she has a hard time keeping the pregnancies. And that really is just this dominating force in her life. And so with her, her sort of this internal conflict was sort of more clear to me, I think, from the very beginning, just because she's so focused on that.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I want to talk a little bit about the title, but I'm going to do so sort of elliptically. That means that I'm going to read a line from your book, if you'll permit me.
Lovely. Yes. Thank you.
So this is a line that really struck me, and I know it's going to strike readers. Mm-hmm. She once heard them described as the whispers, the moments that are trying to tell you something isn't right here. The problem is that some women aren't listening to what their lives are trying to tell them. They don't hear the whispers until they're looking back with hindsight. So tell me about the title, The Whispers, which I think has so many permutations and meanings in this novel. But I do understand it might have also been inspired in part by Oprah Winfrey.
Yes. What isn't inspired by Oprah? No, it's true. Yeah. So I was working on this book. Had worked on the first draft of it before the pandemic, and was kind of working through, that first draft. As you know, Nita, is always sort of this trying to figure out, what you are really writing about and what the book is. And then at some point during the pandemic, I had snuck away for the weekend somewhere to just write, to get out of the house and the chaos of all of that. And I was sort of stuck one afternoon writing. And so I'd gone for a walk in the woods and I put on a podcast, and I just, sort of flipped through and picked this Oprah podcast. And it was a conversation between her and her best friend, Gayle King. And in the podcast, Gayle is being, quite candidly sort of describing this time in her life where she was so busy with, kids and career, and at this midlife point, and she had come home, I think from a work trip. She'd come home and she had found her husband having an affair with somebody they knew, with like a friend of theirs. And in the conversation, she sort of says, I had no idea. I was totally blindsided. I had no idea this was happening. And Oprah, being wonderful Oprah, sort of stops her and says, are you sure? Like, really? You're telling me you really had no idea that this could have potentially been happening? And then Gayle kind of thinks about it and agrees that, no, okay, yeah, there probably were signs. And they have this wonderful conversation about this idea of The whispers, the fact that, we talk a lot about women's intuition, and that whole idea of women's intuition being like this very innate thing. But I think sometimes we can let life get so chaotic and busy, and we listen to everything else, except for this sort of inner knowing that we might have about something. And they talked about it, as this concept of the whispers, that life is always speaking to you. And on this walk, I thought, this is exactly what I'm writing about right now. It was this nice little creative fairy moment that we sometimes get as writers, that you just think, okay, I'm like on the right track, and this is good motivation. And so, yeah, that was really helpful. And I think, and then, I don't know. And then the whispers, there's that concept. And then there's a few other, pieces of the book that sort of allude to this idea of the whispers, which I hope will be kind of fun for readers as they go to kind of pick up on.
Yes, I think that is something that's an undertone that is very enjoyable for the reader to figure out the different meanings of that notion.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about your phenomenal success before this book too. The Push was such a big success. It was a top 10 bestseller, New York Times bestseller. You had rave reviews, every one of them absolutely deserved. You sold in a gamillion territories around the world. And now the book is out. Your second book is out. And you have just received the most incredible rave review from the New York Times, which had a very cheeky sentiment in it that I absolutely loved, where the reviewer suggested that this book should be essential reading for men.
Yes. Yeah.
Which
loved that. Yeah.
I loved that. I agree absolutely. So I feel like you're already poised for immense success for your book too.
Thank you.
But I would like to know from you, what was it like embarking on a book too? Was it difficult in some ways? Was it liberating in other ways? How was that experience for you, moving from a debut to a second book?
Oh, thank you. Well, you know a thing or two about this, Nita,
I do
yourself.
indeed.
I would love for you to chime in with how you have felt. I felt so, it's just such a wild thing. Like, it's daunting and overwhelming, and there's so much self-doubt in the process, there really is. It's sort of this thing where, the Push was received so well, and I felt so lucky, especially having it come out at the time it did, and sort of the thick of this pandemic, and it was just a weird time, but it found such a nice audience, and I was so grateful for that, thanks to a lot of great boosts along the way from, Good Morning America and that great review and everything else. But I don't know. There's always this voice, I think, that says, well, like it's only ever going to happen once. Like that can only happen once, and you're not gonna be able to write another good book again,
Yes.
And I feel like and that does happen. Like I feel like I would sort of, say that, and then people would say like, no, of course, you'll just keep writing. The next one will be great too. But you've worked in publishing a very long time. That sometimes that is the case, sometimes that's the case. And so there's that sort of always in the back of our minds, I think, as writers trying to kind of, deliver a book that will not disappoint people. I think that
Yes.
we have that thing in us, as I think, especially as women, that you don't want to disappoint people. You don't want to disappoint your editors. You don't want to disappoint your readers.
Yeah.
So there's that, that sort of heaviness to it. But I do think I did know, like, from the beginning that I loved writing this. Like, I loved the story. I loved the themes. I really loved these characters. And so I just kind of, like, it was a head down time, just, write. And because I was sort of doing a lot of especially revising during the pandemic, I saw that as such a challenging time, because it was a time when, we didn't have the same creative freedom and space that we would have liked. A lot of writers, you're sort of, we had 2 kids at home, homeschooling a lot and all of that. But it's funny, when I look back now, I think there was it was sort of this fevered writing and revising with it, because I would wake up really early in the morning and just work on the book until my kids got up. And there probably was something to that actually benefited me, that sort of when you are squeezed for time and life feels chaotic,
Yes.
and this is your escape. Like this revising this book was like the only thing that I had, during those pandemic months that were so hard. So there's probably, I think in the end, that probably benefited me a lot with this book.
Yes, there's something about that pressure cooker, that feeling of this is something I have a limited time to focus on that's just for me. And that can be very helpful, can't it?
It can, yeah. And it was this place to sort of channel, everything, which I think probably, comes out in some of the characters and their story and the tone of the book and all of that. Yeah. So,
well, there's now that you say that, like there is a kind of claustrophobia about all of their lives. And I wonder if that was that time period seeping into the characterization in a way,
Yeah, I wonder too. Sometimes I think too, like, I don't know that I'd intentionally set out, the book happens, like the present day storyline happens just over like 3 very condensed days. And then there's, we get some sort of glimpses into, a backyard party that happened some time ago. But I wonder too, if I just was in the headspace to like everything in life felt so, claustrophobic is the best description. Like it almost was like we could not see past the next week that was coming, or the next day that was coming at that time. And I think I probably just really wanted to stay in that sort of really immediate feeling. So I sometimes I wonder if that turned out the way it did because of that too.
Yeah, I wonder too, now that you say it, although I wasn't aware of it, but there's certainly an eerie feeling about those days that they live. Yeah. So no one else realizes this maybe except for you and I, but I'm going to share this with everyone. We belong to a very exclusive club, Ashley and I. It's extremely exclusive. It's a club of 2. There are only 2 members, and that is because we both are very newish writers. We share the same agents. We're both Canadians. Nobody's perfect. We share the same Canadian editor, Nicole Winstanley. We live in the same neighborhood, which I must admit scares me to my core because I worry that one day Ashley's going to write about me. Actually, I might be Rebecca in this novel. It's deeply frightening. Oh, no. But there's one other similarity in our little club of 2 that we have, and that you just alluded to it, and that's that we've both worked. I still work in publishing, and you worked as an incredible publicist for some time. And so we know this industry. We know it pretty well. And, I found that most people will assume that that has been to our great advantage. And that is sometimes true. So can you talk about your experience in publishing and what it gave you, and also, how you felt about entering from the other side of the industry as a writer once you knew so much about publishing?
Oh yeah, that's funny. Yes, we do. We have all of that in common. I know we were joking before this started that we are 10 minutes away, and if technology was different, we could have been sitting together having this, but easier this way. But yes, publishing. I feel like, people I think assume that it, really like, or often people will ask, did it really help with your writing? Like, did working in publishing really help you to become a better writer or help with the writing process? And I don't it's funny, when I look back, I was writing so much more before I started working in publishing. And then when I started working as publicity director at Penguin Canada, I really let writing go for that period of time. And I think it was because it was such an intimidating world to enter. It was such a, I loved that job so much. And I felt like, I always say, I felt like a kid in a candy store, when I went to work every day, like books everywhere and access to all these wonderful authors and like all the conversations about books I loved so much. But I think I started to just really feel like, no, I am the publicist. I promote these books. I do not write them. And as I said, sort of let that go. And then after, when I did start writing, when I had left and gone on maternity leave and had my son and started writing The Push, I don't know. There was like I felt this real division between like that person and then the person who was, now a mother and not going back to work and going to start writing this book. So there was probably a real permission there, or a real sort of freedom to write, to write what I was writing, and kind of in that way. I think that, honestly, the thing that helped me the most was like reading so widely. Like I had never read like that before. And you know, I mean, you have done this, you know, you do this all the time too, but you read like outside of your favorite genres and your favorite authors or your favorite writers, like, and just that wide reading and sort of what you absorb, like that is what helps with your writing, like that. And it's such an education, right? And then you have this like wonderful privilege of hearing from the editors about the book and about what they think of the book. And, you know, I worked for Nicole Winstanley, who is our Canadian editor and publisher. And she was very generous with like letting other people into like the editorial process. And I learned so much from that, like looking at sort of these editorial letters that would go to, you know, go to authors, or like hearing her kind of in a room with an author sort of talk about their work. Like that was all pretty magical, you know, for someone who then sits down to try to write. So that was really valuable. And that I think like really influenced. I think on the other side, I think it's sort of like the more you know, the worse off it is in a way. Like,
yes, I do.
I don't know if you found that, but you know, you must have. But and you're obviously, you know, you're very much, you know, you're an editor. You're on the editorial side. You know what it feels like to write, you know, an editorial letter and receive one now. But yeah, there's something about like I kind of alluded to this before, but you sort of, you know, what can go wrong, like, and I think with, you know, the Maid was very much this too, but with the Push, it was like, there's all this build up and you feel so lucky to get the attention that you get. And like the build up with like the marketing and the buzz in the industry and these really committed publishing teams. But then you also know, because you've seen it, that doesn't always work. And it doesn't always mean a book is going to resonate with readers. And that the only time you know a book is going to work is once it is in the hands of the readers. And that's it. And there's no predicting that. There's no science, or else we would all have bestsellers and everyone, you know, we all publish bestsellers. It's just not, it's something that you can't like put your finger on. It's something you can't predict. Like some books take off and some books don't. And it's not always the ones that we all think. And so there's that in the back of your mind where you can almost kind of see it coming and think, oh God, I hope I'm not in the bucket of the books that don't work, but you might be, but you just don't know.
You never know. But I do think you're pointing to something that's so valuable for young writers or newer writers. And that is the importance of reading widely, reading not only in the genre that you write in, but outside of it, around it, beside it, everything. Being a voracious reader, I think, is one of the best ways to train yourself to be a writer. And I think that publishing gave us both that.
Definitely. And actually, and I can say, like, for sure, I had never read a thriller before I started working at Penguin. Like,
wow, I didn't know that.
I would never have picked one up. I would never have. And I was working at Penguin in the days, like, Gone Girl had just come out, like, Girl on the Train was published, like, the year that I left publishing. Like, that hadn't happened, like, before. Like, so the time that I was in publishing was that time, you know, with this, like, explosion of domestic suspense. So that was not like, I didn't read like any mystery or thriller authors really before that.
Wow.
Yeah. So that just goes to show you, you know, you really like, you absorb so much, and you just, the reading is everything. It is.
Well, and I think your book is so much more than a thriller. And I think that shows that you're able to use that engine of the thriller, but really look deeply and literarily into the lives of women and create more than just, you know, a rip-roaring page-turner. And now that you say that, it makes sense to me that the roots of what you do go so much deeper.
Thanks, Nita.
So I want to circle back to your characters, because we're, you know, before we run out of time. So we talked about longing a bit, and it seems to me that all of your characters in this book, but especially the women, have you know, this feeling, this longing for something that they don't have. You know, Blair, you know, lacks passion in her marriage, and she longs for her friend's life. And Rebecca, well, she longs for a child of her own. We've got Whitney. She really just desperately wants a chance to do it all over again, to be a better mother to her son, to find a way to get close to him. So what does this say about being a middle-aged woman, you know, in her 40s at this point in time? Like, can we have it all? If we can't, is the Whispers what compromise looks like?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Yeah, I think longing is sort of an inevitable part of life, like an inevitable feeling, you know, in
Right.
midlife. I think you're right, we all long for something. And yeah, sometimes we know what that is and sometimes we don't. And to me, it kind of comes back to that idea, like, you know, there's the idea of longing, and I think there's also the idea of like hunger, you know, like, which to me is like an even more injected longing. You know, it's like an even stronger longing. It's like
on steroids.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's like, and I think these women also have this hunger for something. And you know, I'm reading this, or I just finished on audio this book that I just loved. It's called I'm going to forget the name of it, but it's about the 7 deadly sins, and how they are related to like women today, like modern womanhood, and how they all kind of play into this kind of how they sort of dictate behavior today. It's by an author called Elise Lunan. So she taught, you know, she goes through all the sins and so brilliantly like connects them. And so much of that spoke to me in terms of these characters and like what I was writing about. And I think as women, like, we're not supposed to be hungry for anything. You know, we are not supposed,
we're supposed to feed others. We're not supposed to eat.
Exactly that. We are not supposed to hunger. We are not supposed to long. We're not supposed to want more. And I think each of the characters in this book wants more. And that there's such a sense of shame, you know, attached to that for women, I think. And like, I think we're taught that so young, like we're taught that as girls, as like young girls, you know, like not to want more, not to ask for more, be happy with what you have. All those messages that we get so young, like they stay with us, and then they're perpetuated, you know, into adulthood and womanhood. And then I think especially when you get to be a mother, you especially aren't supposed to feel that way, because as you said, you're the one giving, you're the one providing, and you take last. Like that is the message. You take last. You give everything you have to everyone else, and then what's left over is what you can do with your time or your money or your everything, you know. And so, yeah, I think that is sort of at the heart of like what they're struggling with at this point, this midlife point. Yeah, and then I think, and Mara, like I forgot to touch on Mara earlier when we were talking about the characters, but I'm so glad you brought her up, because I mean, she to me is like, I mean, I love all these characters, but I really love Mara. And
me too.
Well, thank you. She's a woman in her 80s, which, you know, we don't read a ton about, you know, in books like this. And yeah, she is this kind of quiet observer or voyeur, you know, that lives next door. And she actually was inspired by like a neighbor that I had when I was living in Little Portugal in Toronto before I moved to our neighborhood. I was living in Little Portugal. We lived there for 8 years, and that is the house that we, you know, our first house, and we had our both kids. Like that was the house we brought our kids home to. Like we started raising our family there, and we lived next door to this wonderful family. And there was this husband and wife who they were Portuguese immigrants, and they must have moved there probably like, you know, 60 years earlier, 65 years earlier. And they embodied that really beautiful, you know, almost extinct porch culture, you know, of like sitting on the porch all day long and really watching the neighborhood, watching the world go by. And I never once in those 8 years had a conversation with them because they didn't speak any English at all.
Wow.
But it was like, I feel like they knew us so intimately, you know, like I really felt that every day. It was like, they'd watch us walk to school and watch us do everything, and probably hear me yell at my kids, and, you know, all of the, like everything that, you know, you have with like a neighbor, you know, they watched our kids grow up. They watched, you know, we did this renovation at the back of our house and it was noisy, and like we were the obnoxious, loud, noisy family, you know, that moved in next door. And I was always so aware of that and thought about that so much. And my mind would kind of wander to like, wow, this woman is watching me and like other people on the street, you know, like go about the hustle of modern motherhood and raising these kids and doing everything we're doing and hustling off to do this and that. And I thought, I wonder if she ever sits there. I know she has children, and I wonder if she sits there and thinks like, wow, like these women, like what are they doing? What are they doing? Like what is this life? What do they care about? Why do they care about the things they care about? Like, where did she come from? And what did motherhood look like for her? And like, what were her struggles? And what did her midlife look like? And I would think about that a lot. I'll never have the answers to that, but so that's sort of where this character of Mara is sort of inspired by that feeling, that relationship.
You say you'll never have the answer for that, but I see it on the page and I see the answer to it in this most beautiful, gossamer, delicate relationship that blossoms between Mara and Xavier, who is Whitney's son. So we get to go back into the past and learn from 2 points of view what that relationship was all about. And we have this older woman bonding with this young neighbor boy in the most incredible way. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for asking about that. It's this sort of a quieter part of the book, but
it is so important and so beautiful what you did there.
Thank you for noticing that. That relationship really built through the revisions. Like, it wasn't quite there early days. And then as sort of like layering on kind of the dynamics between the families and the street and the characters, I just sort of felt them kind of pull together, and then they sort of take on their own little, as you said, their own kind of storyline, their own relationship. And that bond becomes quite significant, to the plot eventually. I love that idea of both of them feeling like the true outsiders on the street.
Exactly. Yeah. And they speak their own language, which I'm not going to say what language that is, but it's a way of communicating that is so special and so theirs. And they bond in this extraordinary way. And I don't want to say too much about that, but I think it's a real invitation to the readers to discover what that's all about.
Oh, thanks, Nita.
You mentioned voyeurism. So you have a lot of voyeurs, not just Mara. You also have this feeling of like keeping up with the Joneses and seeing what the neighbors are doing and looking through the curtains. And certainly there's a whole lot of watching going on. Mara is definitely a voyeur. She keeps a close eye on the neighborhoods and has many opinions about what's going on. But Blair as well is a next level voyeur. And she scares me deeply to the core because of the lengths to which she'll go to see what she wants to see. So tell me, what's all this looking about? What's
I mean, I'm probably never going to be asked to house sit again. I probably won't. I probably don't have to worry about that anymore. No, but I just think there is something so terribly creepy and also kind of delicious about this idea, about being sort of this voyeur, on the street and in other people's lives. And maybe it's because I'm nosy. I'm a nosy writer. I think all writers are nosy. You're probably nosy too, Nita.
We are.
But it's just that feeling of like, and it sort of shows up in the first scene of The Push too, but it's that feeling of like, I think everyone sort of enjoys going for a walk in the evening and it's dark and everyone's lights are on and sometimes the drapes are open a little or the blinds are open. And you can kind of just see people sort of going about the humdrum of their evening. And I love that. I just think that is so interesting to me. And
my partner gets me in trouble for that all the time. We'll go for a night walk and I'm like, ooh, I love night walks because I can see into everybody's living room. And he thinks I'm creepy.
See, I will be your night walk partner if you ever want to go creeping around the neighborhood. But I love that you can see like the way people decorate their house. And I mean, I know that sounds very creepy. I don't go out and do this on the regular, but I think we can all identify, with that feeling. There was something in one of the newspapers, I don't know if it was the New York Times or something the other day, that was saying that like, it's that idea of that like New York apartment living or culture when you're sort of like the road, like all the stacks of windows looking into all the other stacks of windows. I think we all gravitate towards that. So I wanted to play with that, with these characters in this kind of on this setting and on the street. And I also loved that, Blair is a person who always has to do the right thing. She wants to be like, a good girl. She wants to be, a good mother and a good wife and a good friend, all these things. But yet she has this one thing that she does that she knows she should not be doing. She should not be snooping, in a house, but she does. And loves to, and like has a habit of it. And I just think, it's such a bad thing to do, but would be very satisfying, in the right context.
Actually, I would never giving you a key.
I would never do it. I would never really do it, but
Okay, well, I do want to leave some time for questions from readers and audience members out there, because I know they're going to have lots of things to ask you. So I'll just ask one more question, and then we can go to audience questions. And that question is, you have two beautiful young children, and do you ever think about them reading your work? And what do you, if they do, what do you hope that they take away from your novels when they read you?
Oh, I don't think about it while I am writing. I don't think about what anyone will think or what, there's a favorite piece of writing advice that is, I don't know who to attribute it to, but it's write like your parents are dead. And, like, thankfully mine are not, but it's that feeling of like, take away, the judgment of what you think people are going to say and just go for it. And I really try to do that. I don't think about what my kids are going to think. I don't think about what my parents are going to think, or my, poor husband. But yeah, I think I hope that they do, read my books one day. And I hope that they, see them as see them for what they are. I do. And I think like we talk a lot about stories and fiction and creativity, that my kids love like narrative and storytelling, and they're always, sort of nattering away different like lines of dialogue. Like they are kids who really kind of enjoy that. And I hope they always do. I hope they always voraciously read books and love story. And I hope that they see my books as just that, just that. And I also think sometimes I thought about this a little more with like the idea of motherhood. I have a daughter, she's only 5, so she's still so young, but I hope that we can have really like honest conversations about what it means to be, a partner and a mother, and the direction that a woman's life can go and doesn't have to go. And maybe this will give her sort of, a bit of a license or permission to like be who she really wants to be in the world and not what the world thinks she, should be. So
yes. Well, that is lovely. Ashley, it has been an absolute pleasure. So I'm going to
Nita,
turn this over
thank you,
now.
Nita. You're the best, Nita. Thank you. It was so fun. Thanks.
I am back. Nita, Ashley, thank you both so much. This conversation was incredibly engaging. I had a really good time watching it from behind the scenes. But we are going to move to the Q&A. So if you haven't gotten your questions in, please do so now. I'll be reading them. But before we do that, I kind of wanted to ask a question of my own, just because out of curiosity. Obviously, you made it very clear that this book is very character driven. So in the process of writing it, did you have a clear idea of the character and the plot developed after that? Or was it the plot and then the characters developed as you built the plot? I was wondering your process on that.
Yeah, the characters really were like the characters kind of came together first. And there's one sort of inciting incident in the book at the beginning, and that I was always very clear on and knew what was going to happen at the beginning. And then the characters kind of came, and really I did not have a ton planned out for this book when I wrote the first draft, which, is a like sort of painful, messy way, as Nita will tell you, to write a book. But it does allow for that sort of meandering and for you as the writer to sort of surprise yourself. And so I wanted to sort of leave room for that. So the characters were really the more driving force, and the plot sort of came from that. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Thank you.
Okay, well, now to the audience. We have a question from Liz asking, Ashley, what plans do you have to promote the Whispers in the coming year?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I am going to be doing quite a few festivals happening in Canada in the fall. And I'm also going to a festival in the summer in Columbus, Ohio. That'll be really fun. It's their inaugural book festival. I'm looking forward to that. And I'm going to be going overseas this summer too, to promote the book there and be there for the launch in London, which will be really fun. And so we'll sort of see, where things go from there. But I'll be doing a lot of talking about it on social media and engaging with readers there, which I'm really excited about. Yeah, it should be a fun summer.
Another question we have, love this book, Ashley. I was fortunate to get an ARC via NetGalley and devoured it in one night.
Thank you.
Do you have any advice for queering authors trying to break into publishing?
Ooh, yeah, I'd love to hear Nita's advice on this too, as the publisher and the #1 New York Times bestselling author. You tell us, Nita, you go for it.
Well, I alluded to one piece of advice that I always give writers, which is read. Read. And I don't just mean the reading like that, which is just great when you read a book overnight. I mean, read and reread. I mean, take a book that you love or that might be in some ways instructive to what you're writing and understand its mechanisms, understand how it works. Not the first time. You'll never do that with a good book on the first time because it should be invisible to you as a reader. But then dissect it, understand its engine, its pieces and parts. And sometimes that can be very, very instructive to your own process and to help you get over those points when you get stuck, because inspiration can drive a writer only so far. And then at a certain point, you're going to go, I don't know I don't know what to do next. And so going back to look at models of books that really have a strong shape and architecture and that moved you can help you figure out your own path. That's why I'm an editor. That's why I continue to edit, because my writers teach me every day. That's my advice.
That's great. That's great advice. That's great advice. Yeah. I think something that I think of in terms of like the thing that I never wanted, when I was starting to write novels, like trying to write a novel, the thing I never wanted to do was show it to anybody. I was so nervous to kind of give my work to other people. But actually every time I did do that, like what I was working on got so much better, like, because you really need feedback and you need to hear from other people about what's working and what's not working. And it's like, it's a real satisfying, like experience to talk about your work with someone else, especially after just head down on your own being such a solitary thing. And I feel like a lot of writers starting out are like scared. They're scared to like share it with somebody. I have a writing partner named Ashley Tate. She has her first book coming out in the very beginning of 2024. It's excellent. But she and I have been like writing partners for like almost 10 years, and just showing, like getting brave enough to like to send her stuff in the very beginning and like ask for her criticism was just huge in helping me kind of get better. So I would say like find someone who's also like who's gonna give you like really good, honest feedback is really helpful.
Ashley, congratulations on all of your amazing success. If you were starting out as a new writer right now, is there anything you'd do differently?
I don't know. I think, I would kind of go back to what I just said about like sharing earlier. I feel like it took me so long to I never wanted to admit to anybody that I was trying to write a book. I was like I kept it so close to my chest. And I think that did benefit me for a long time. Like there is something really beneficial about I don't know if you feel like this, Nita, but like keeping things close, and it kind of keeps the creative energy and magic alive. But there does come a point where you need somebody to like rip it from your hand and start to really dig in and like get the proper criticism on it. And I waited a long time to do that. I maybe would do that a bit earlier to try to get more critique earlier, but everyone's on their own journey so much, it's like, I don't know. What do you think, Nita? What do you think?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Like I would have loved to become a writer sooner, but I wasn't ready.
That too.
So, I'm actually very glad that I waited in a way. But I wish I'd had the wisdom and the knowledge that I have now, but unfortunately I'm a slow learner. It took me 20 years of editing other writers to really feel the confidence I needed to tackle a novel myself. So if there was a way I could have sped that learning up, I sure would have loved it.
Yeah.
But there wasn't.
I agree with that. Yeah.
So I think there's so much beauty to that though, really getting into the mechanics of editing before you actually start your own work. So I think there's pros to that for sure. We have another question from Rachel asking, the New York Times wants all men to read this book, but as you were writing, who was your intended audience?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I that review from Ivy Pachota was, when she said that, I thought, I appreciated that because I think that like, you know, what she was alluding to in the review was like, so often we like, you know, we talk about these books as like, well, it's written by a woman and it's about women, so it just should be women readers. And I think, yeah, it's funny when I have to say, like, my intended audience was women. Like, it's women, you know, readers like me, I think, who are at that stage in life and interested in this kind of thing. But I don't know if you're ever writing for like a real intended reader. You're sort of writing the story you really want to tell, and you sort of think you know who it's going to resonate with, but you don't always know, you know, who the story is going to resonate with. And like, I had so many wonderful like male readers reach out on the push to say that they'd read it, or they'd read it with their partner, and that they took so much away from it, and that really stayed with me. And I do hope that's also true of The Whispers, because I think sometimes we read to like feel seen and to have our experiences validated and to relate. And sometimes we read to like learn about people that we don't relate to, you know, or we don't share an experience with. So I think I hope it kind of offers both of that. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Moving on, we have a question from Catherine asking, for both Ashley and Nita, which books are on your summer TBR? Any recommendations?
Go for it, Nita.
Oh, geez. Me first? No, you first. The problem is, and Ashley will understand this, is that I have a stack of manuscripts that I'm reading of books that, you know, you'll all be reading in 2 years from now and that I can't talk about right now.
Yeah, I know. That is part of the problem. A few books that I'm looking forward to reading. I really want to read. Jessica Knoll has a book coming out called Bright Young Women. I think it's coming out in the fall or maybe later this summer, but I'm really looking forward to reading that. I've heard really great things about it. Other things I can't wait to read. There's so many. Like there's so many good books coming out this summer that I'm really, really excited for. I really want to read Emma Cline's latest. That I cannot wait to read. I'm so excited. I'm really looking forward to like a good chunk of like time where I can just put everything else away and read that. I have a couple of books here that I've read recently that I've loved, that I can share. One is, so this book is nonfiction, but I love this book so much. I don't know if, Nita, if you've read this or if anyone watching it. So it's called You Could Make This Place Beautiful. It's a memoir by Maggie Smith, who's a poet. And it's about the end of her marriage. And it is such a moving, like totally, I was so engrossed in this book. I listened to it on audio. I was in New York for a few days, and it was the book I like had in my ears as I was kind of going around New York. And it just was like, I couldn't get enough of it. I just love her writing, and it was so insightful. Such a good read. And so I had to go out and get the hard copy too, because it's the book that I need to like be able to go back and reference things. So yeah, I really loved that. And then this book I can highly recommend too. It came out a couple weeks ago, The Three of Us, by Audrain, I might say her name wrong, sorry, Agbaje Williams. She is just such an interesting, like, original writer. I read this and just thought, like, you know how sometimes you read a book and think, oh, wow, like that was different. That was daring. That was totally fresh. She's that kind of writer, and it takes place over the course of an evening. And it's really this dynamic between three people. It is a wife and her husband and the wife's best friend, and the best friend and the husband absolutely hate each other. And it's their dynamic kind of over the course of a night. And I like gobbled it up. I just thought it was so cool and such a different book. So those are two that I can highly recommend that I've read just recently. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for sharing. I think that's all the time that we have for tonight. But thank you both so much. This was incredibly insightful. I had such a good time watching. And please, to everyone, purchase your copy of The Whispers from your local independent bookstore. There's a green button below our faces where you can purchase. And thank you both so much. Have a good evening.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks.
Good night.